Imagine a war where death came not from the crack of rifles or the thunder of artillery, but from an invisible enemy unleashed by human hands. The Japanese soldiers who never fired a bullet but killed thousands. In the frozen expanses of northeast China, during the brutal winter of 1936, the Imperial Japanese Army established a covert facility in the Pingfang district of Harbin, Manchukuo, the puppet state carved from occupied Manchuria. Under the command of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii and the Kwantung Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, officially designated as Unit 731, a group of military scientists, surgeons, and technicians, soldiers in lab coats rather than combat fatigues, embarked on a mission that would redefine the horrors of modern warfare. Little did the world know, this remote outpost, surrounded by snow-swept plains and barbed wire, would become a laboratory of death, where biological weapons were forged in secrecy, far from the front lines of the Second Sino-Japanese War that had erupted in 1937. Shiro Ishii was no ordinary officer. Born in 1992, he had risen through the ranks of the Imperial Japanese Army as a brilliant microbiologist, inspired by his studies in Europe and America during the 1920s. Ishii believed that biological warfare represented the future of conflict, an asymmetric tool that could decimate enemies without the need for costly invasions or direct confrontations. By 1932, he had already set up a preliminary research lab in Tokyo, but the occupation of Manchuria in 1931 provided the perfect isolated testing ground. With Emperor Hirohito's imperial decree in 1936, Unit 731 was fully operational, expanding to include over 3,000 personnel by 1940, including elite surgeons like Colonel Chikahiko Koizumi, Major General Masaji Kitano, and Army engineer Yoshimura Hisato. These men, drawn from Japan's top medical universities, were assigned ranks such as lieutenant colonel or major, blending military discipline with scientific pursuit. The strategic situation was dire for Japan. The invasion of China in July 1937 had bogged down into a quagmire, with a vast Chinese landscape and resilient nationalist and communist forces draining resources. The Kwantung Army, Japan's premier force in Manchuria, faced threats from the Soviet Union to the north, where border clashes like the 1939 Battle of Khalkhin Gol had exposed vulnerabilities. Conventional weapons, Type 38 Arasaka, Type 92 heavy machine guns, and Type 95 Ha-Go light tanks were proving insufficient against the sheer numbers of Chinese troops and the harsh terrain of mountains, rivers, and endless plains. Biological weapons offered a critical edge, silent, insidious killers that could spread plague, cholera, and anthrax through populations, crippling armies and civilians alike without a single shot fired. Unit 731's mission was to develop these agents, testing them on human subjects to perfect delivery methods like porcelain bombs filled with infected fleas or aerial sprays from Mitsubishi K-21 bombers. Why was this moment critical? Japan aimed to break the stalemate in China and prepare for total war with the Allies, envisioning bioweapons as a game-changer akin to the atomic bomb. But the human cost was unimaginable. Prisoners, Chinese civilians, Soviet spies, Korean laborers, and even Allied POWs were dehumanized as maruta, or logs, in official records, their lives reduced to data points in Ishii's grand experiment. Fear gripped the researchers at first, but duty and ambition hardened them. The bitter cold of the Russian winter, temperatures plunging to minus 40 degrees Celsius, added to the isolation, with snowdrifts piling against the facility's 150 buildings, masking the screams from within. By early 1939, the experiments began in earnest, building a foundation of terror that would escalate with each passing month. In the frost-laced laboratories of Pingfang, just 20 kilometers south of Harbin, technicians in white coats and gas masks cultivated deadly pathogens in 4,500 flea incubators, producing up to 45 kilograms of plague-infected insects per cycle. The first tests were on animals, rats, mice, and camels, but soon shifted to humans. By 1400 hours on a typical winter day, guards from the Kempeitai military police would march prisoners, shackled and blindfolded, into Block Row, the central experimentation hall. There, under Ishii's oversight, surgeons like Ken Yusa performed vivisections without anesthesia, slicing open abdomens to observe the spread of injected bubonic plague bacilli. The air filled with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of disinfectants, while the prisoners' muffled cries echoed against concrete walls. Tension mounted as the war intensified. In June 1939, following the humiliating defeat at Khalkhin Gol, where Soviet T-26 tanks and BT-7 cavalry overwhelmed Japanese forces, Ishii accelerated research. Frostbite experiments, led by Yoshimura Hisato, exposed prisoners' limbs to the sub-zero Manchurian winds for 3 brutal hours, dipping arms in freezing water salted to -20 degrees Celsius. The men shivered uncontrollably, their skin cracking like brittle ice, as researchers noted resistance indices with detached precision. One infant, just 3 days old, was submerged in an ice bath, its tiny wails piercing the lab's sterile silence. Little did they know these tests would inform field deployments, but the ethical abyss deepened. By 1,000 hours in October 1940, the unit prepared its first major field trial. Enemy numbers were staggering. Chinese forces, under Chiang Kai-shek, fielded millions, equipped with German Mauser rifles and American Lend-Lease supplies. To counter this, Unit 731 loaded porcelain bombs with anthrax spores and plague fleas onto Nakajima K-27 fighters. The approaching threat was not just military, it was the failure to weaponize diseases effectively. Initial tests backfired. Infected rats escaped labs, spreading typhoid among Japanese guards. By midday on October 27, 1940, planes took off from a nearby airstrip, dropping their deadly cargo over Ningbo, a coastal city in Zhejiang province, 1,500 kilometers south. Fleas rained down like black snow, infesting homes and fields. Within days, bubonic plague erupted, swollen lymph nodes bursting in agony, victims coughing blood in the humid autumn air. 99 confirmed deaths in Ningbo alone, but the outbreak spread, claiming hundreds more in surrounding villages. The pace quickened. By 0800 hours in November 1941, amid the escalating Pacific War following Pearl Harbor, Ishii ordered a larger assault on Changde, Hunan Province, a strategic hub defended by the Chinese 57th Division with Type 24 Chiang Kai-shek rifles and Vickers machine guns. The terrain was challenging, misty rivers and rice paddies, ideal for disease vectors. Planes from the 1st Air Group dropped wheat, rice, and cotton laced with plague fleas, just 200 yards above ground level. The invisible army advanced, fleas biting skin, bacteria multiplying in bloodstreams. Tension peaked as reports filtered back. Initial infections hit Chinese civilians, but wind shifts carried the plague toward Japanese lines. Fear gripped the unit's commanders. What if their creation turned against them? Experiments intensified back in Pingfong. By 1,600 hours daily, prisoners were strapped to stakes 300 yards from bomb detonation sites, testing shrapnel laced with tetanus. The deafening roar of explosions mixed with screams, shards tearing flesh in the dusty Manchurian wind. Gas chambers tested phosgene and mustard gas, prisoners clawing at glass walls as lungs burned. By 1942, attacks expanded to Guizhou and other Yangtze towns, contaminating wells with cholera vibrios. Enemy equipment now included invisible microbes, numbering in the billions. The human toll mounted. Over 10,000 prisoners cycled through Pingfong, their bodies dissected for data. Surgeons like Yuasa, hands trembling at first, grew numb, performing up to 10 vivisections a week. The weight of command decisions pressed on Ishii. He knew the Geneva Protocol banned such weapons, yet sheer determination drove him forward. What happened next would become legendary in the annals of infamy. By late 1941, the situation in Changde had spiraled into catastrophe. The city, nestled along the Yuan River with its fog-shrouded banks, became ground zero for Unit 731's most devastating deployment. On November 4, 1941, at 1100 hours, 3 Mitsubishi Ki-21 bombers from the Hamamatsu Air Base, escorted by Zero fighters, released their payload over the urban center. No bullets fired, no bombs exploded, only silent grains and fleas drifting down like autumn leaves. Within 48 hours, the first victims appeared, civilians swelling with bubonic plague, their bodies racked with fever in the damp 15 degrees Celsius weather. The impossible situation unfolded as the disease ignored battle lines. Chinese troops of the 74th Army, armed with Hanyang 88 rifles, fell ill alongside farmers, their camps turning into charnel houses. Black rats scurried through trenches, spreading the pestilence further. Everything seemed lost. By December, the outbreak had claimed 1,700 lives in Changde alone, with biological casualties exceeding 10,000 across Hunan. But horror compounded when Japanese soldiers of the 11th Army, equipped with Type 99 light machine guns and advancing just 5 kilometers from the city, began succumbing. Cholera and dysentery ripped through their ranks, self-inflicted wounds from poor containment. Commanders radioed frantic reports, pathogens rebounding, casualties mounting. Ishii paced the Harbin headquarters, the bitter cold seeping through windows as snow howled outside. The unit's creation had backfired, killing their own men against impossible odds. Prisoners in Pingfang, sensing chaos, whispered of rebellion, but guards crushed any hope with bayonets, though the researchers themselves never fired a shot.
The crisis deepened through 1942 to 1944. Attacks on Xinjiang and Jiangxi provinces unleashed anthrax and typhoid, contaminating reservoirs with bacterial cultures dropped from 500 feet. Villages burned with fever, bodies piling in streets under relentless summer rains. Cumulative deaths soared. 200,000 Chinese civilians perished from engineered epidemics, their agony unseen by the world. In Pingfang, experiments reached fever pitch. By 0900 hours on a frigid January 1943 morning, Yoshimura's team exposed 20 prisoners to minus 30 degrees Celsius winds for 4 hours, limbs freezing solid, then thawed with hot water scalding at 50 degrees. One man, a Russian POW, screamed as his fingers shattered like glass. The sensory overload, the crack of ice, the stench of gangrene, overwhelmed even hardened staff. Yuasa later recalled the weight. Fear gripped the men, but orders were absolute. The war turned grim. Allied advances in the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, signaled Japan's doom. Soviet forces massed on the Manchurian border, their T-34 tanks rumbling 100 kilometers away. Unit 731 faced annihilation. Evidence of atrocities could doom them to war crimes trials. The facility, once a beacon of innovation, now a tomb of secrets, teetered on collapse. In August 1945, a Soviet artillery thundered across the border during Operation August Storm. Ishii made the heroic decision, from his perspective, to preserve the unit's legacy at any cost. Against impossible odds, with Red Army divisions like the 6th Guards Tank Army closing in just 50 kilometers away, he ordered the destruction of Pingfang. At 1200 hours on August 9, technicians released cyanide into prisoner blocks, gassing 300 remaining Maruta in a haze of choking fumes. Others were injected with potassium cyanide, their bodies convulsing in the dim light. Guards shot 600 Chinese laborers to silence witnesses, the pops of Type 99 rifles echoing in the chaos. Though the core researchers never pulled triggers, the unexpected solution came in the form of calculated evasion. Ishii commanded staff to take the secret to the grave, distributing cyanide vials, but many fled with research data, thousands of slides, reports on plague strains like Yersinia pestis, and formulas for anthrax bombs. Buildings were dynamited, flames roaring against the Manchurian twilight, reducing labs to rubble amid acrid smoke. Yet key documents survived, hidden in suitcases. Little did the Allies know, this act of destruction was a turning point. As Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, Ishii
Ishii and his top aides, Kitano, Naito, negotiated with American forces under General Douglas MacArthur. In exchange for immunity, they handed over the bioweapons data, explaining how they overcame logistical odds, breeding fleas in isolation, testing on humans for efficacy, deploying via low-altitude drops to evade detection. The deal, sealed in secrecy, allowed them to evade the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. Sheer determination triumphed. What could have been execution became quiet retirement. Ishii retired to Japan, his solution ensuring the knowledge lived on, though at the cost of justice. The outcome was staggering. Unit 731's operations ceased with Japan's defeat, but the toll lingered. Verified casualties included over 3,000 killed in ping-pong experiments alone, with branches pushing the figure to 10,000 to 12,000 prisoners. Bio-warfare attacks claimed 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese lives, from plague in Changde to anthrax in Chuzhou. Entire villages wiped out, families torn by invisible foes. Japanese losses were ironic. 1,700 troops died from their own agents in Hunan. The historical significance is profound. Unit 731 exposed the depths of wartime inhumanity, paralleling Nazi experiments, but shrouded in post-war silence. The immunity deal, approved by President Truman, prioritized Cold War advantages over justice, allowing figures like Ishii to die unpunished in 1959. Some, like Ryoichi Naito, founded pharmaceutical companies using the data. Medals and recognition were internal. Ishii received promotions to lieutenant general and the Order of the Rising Sun for his contributions, though never publicly for bioweapons. The human cost weighed heavy. Survivors like Yoshio Shinozuka testified in later trials, revealing the triumph of the human spirit in exposing truths. In 2002, a Tokyo court acknowledged the atrocities, awarding symbolic compensation to victims' families. The Ping-Fong site now stands as the Museum of War Crime Evidence by Japanese Army Unit 731, a somber reminder amid Harbin's modern skyline. These soldiers, who never fired a bullet, left a legacy of horror, underscoring war's capacity to erode humanity. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to Past Horizon as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.